I never thought silence could be louder than words. But that night, in the middle of a crowded family dinner table, silence thundered through the room. Forks froze in midair, conversations collapsed into uneasy breathing, and every eye widened as the soldier beside me rose, heels clicking against the hardwood floor, and delivered a salute. To me, a crisp, precise, military salute, right there, between the roasted chicken and the untouched glasses of red wine. It was the kind of gesture that belonged on parade grounds or in front of flag-draped coffins, not at my mother's dining room table. Yet in that moment, it broke through 7 years of accusations, resentment, and unspoken history, and it revealed more than any argument ever could. I sat there in my uniform, wrists aching from the cold bite of steel cuffs, and I did not speak a single word. I didn't need to. That salute, offered in reverence and recognition, said everything for me. Before I take you deeper into this journey, before I unravel how a family dinner turned into a battlefield of betrayal and redemption, I want to pause. If you find meaning in stories like mine, stories of resilience, justice, and the quiet strength that women in uniform carry long after the battlefield, I invite you to support this channel. Please like this video, subscribe, and stay with me. Because here, we honor not only the victories fought overseas, but also the unseen battles waged at home. Now, let me take you back. Back before the salute, before the humiliation, before the quiet vindication that changed everything. Let me take you to the letter that started it all. It was an ordinary morning in Georgia when the envelope appeared in my mailbox, its handwriting so familiar it pulled me instantly into a past I had worked hard to bury. My brother Nathan's script, firm but rushed, sprawled across the page. "Come home," it read. "We need to talk. Mom is waiting for your answer. 7 years. That was how long I had been gone. 7 years since I last sat at my mother's table. 7 years since I had walked away from the farm where I grew up, with nothing but a duffel bag and the determination to carve a life outside the walls that had always suffocated me. In those years, I had carried rucksacks across deserts, listened to the metallic thrum of helicopters cutting through hostile skies, and learned the language of silence that soldiers speak when words are too fragile for the weight of reality. But Nathan's letter sliced through me. It wasn't just an invitation, it was a command. And commands, after all, were something I had been trained never to ignore. Still, I hesitated. My relationship with my family was a minefield. My mother's disapproval had followed me into every promotion, every deployment. To her, my choice to serve was abandonment. To Nathan, it was betrayal. He had been left to carry the burden of our family's expectations while I disappeared into a world he neither understood nor respected. And yet, I went. Maybe because a part of me still longed for home. Maybe because, deep down, I hoped for reconciliation. Or maybe because I had grown weary of silence, and some part of me believed this dinner might offer a truce. But I was wrong. When I walked into that dining room, I should have noticed the way Nathan's jaw tightened, the way my mother's eyes flickered with a mix of longing and condemnation. The meal smelled of rosemary and butter, but beneath the aroma, I could sense something acrid, like smoke waiting to rise. We sat. We bowed our heads in prayer. And then Nathan stood. The words he spoke were daggers disguised as righteousness. He accused me of fabricating my service record, of inflating my rank, of dishonoring the very uniform I wore. He waved a folder filled with printed pages, claiming it was proof. He said he had spoken to people who confirmed his suspicions. And before I could react, he snapped the cuffs around my wrists. The sting of the steel was nothing compared to the sting of betrayal. My own brother, a sheriff sworn to uphold the law, was parading me as a fraud in front of the people who had always doubted me. I could feel my mother's gaze, torn between shock and a grim kind of vindication. But I didn't fight. I didn't shout. Years of military discipline held me still. I remembered the mantra we learned in the field: never let your emotions dictate your actions. Control is power. Silence is power. So I stayed silent. And then, just when the tension in the room threatened to snap, the knock at the door came. That sound changed everything. What followed you already glimpsed in the opening. The salute. The revelation. The truth that had been buried beneath years of resentment, finally standing in the open like a flag rising against the wind. But to understand why that moment mattered, you need to walk with me through the path that led there. The letter, the dinner, the accusations, the silence, and finally the justice. This isn't just a story about me. It's a story about every soldier who has ever returned home to find the battlefield isn't always across the ocean. It can be right at your own table. It's a story about jealousy, misunderstanding, and the unshakable strength that comes when you choose dignity over anger. Stay with me, because in the chapters ahead, you'll see how a single evening revealed the truth about loyalty, family, and the cost of silence. The letter came on a Tuesday morning, though it felt less like mail and more like an ambush. I pulled it from the mailbox, expecting nothing more than the usual bills and catalogs, and froze when I saw my brother's handwriting. Sharp strokes, pressed so deeply into the envelope you could almost feel the frustration behind them. Nathan had always written like that, as if the pen were an enemy to be subdued rather than a tool to be guided. I stood on my porch, still holding the watering can I'd been using on the tomato plants that clung stubbornly to life in the late summer heat. The Georgia sun was relentless even this far north, pouring across my shoulders in heavy, suffocating waves. But it wasn't the weather that made me feel lightheaded. It was the sight of that envelope, ordinary in appearance, devastating in impact. Inside, I already knew, would be words that demanded something from me. Words that would tether me again to a family I had worked so hard to untangle myself from. I should have thrown it aside, left it unopened, but soldiers don't ignore summonses, not even ones delivered in ink instead of official orders. I slipped a finger beneath the seal and unfolded the page. Come home, it read. 2 words. Nothing else in the world could have weighed more heavily. My eyes moved to the next line, breath tightening in my chest. We need to talk. Mom is waiting for your answer. No warmth. No apology. No recognition of the 7 years that stretched between our last conversation and this moment. Just command. And underneath it, the echo of every grievance that had driven me away. I leaned against the railing, the wood hot beneath my palm, and stared out across the quiet street. Children pedaled by on bicycles. A neighbor waved from across the lawn, the ordinary rhythm of suburban life moving as if nothing had changed. But inside me, something shifted. Old wounds stirred, restless, whispering reminders of the girl I once was. The girl who had left Georgia with a duffel bag, a set of orders, and a heart desperate for escape. 7 years. That number clanged like a bell in my head. 7 years since I'd sat at my mother's table. 7 years since Nathan had looked at me without resentment burning in his eyes. 7 years since I had felt the peculiar weight of home, heavy not with love but with judgment. And now, come home. Have you ever tried to outrun your past, only to find it sitting on your doorstep, disguised in familiar handwriting? If you have, you'll understand that rush of dread, that mix of longing and fear that leaves you paralyzed. Part of me wanted to burn the letter, watch the flames eat away at its demands. Another part, quieter but insistent, told me I couldn't. I carried it inside, laid it flat on the kitchen counter, and filled the coffee pot with water. The kitchen hummed with the low comfort of the refrigerator. The clock ticked steadily above the doorway, and for a moment I clung to those small, ordinary sounds. They reminded me that I had built a life separate from the chaos of my childhood, Yet the letter, sitting there like a verdict, threatened to undo it all. Mom is waiting for your answer. The words circled my mind like crows. What answer did she expect? Did she want me to explain why I had left? Did she want me to apologize for serving, for finding purpose in something beyond the boundaries of our small town? Or maybe she wanted me to admit that Nathan had been right all along, that I was selfish, ungrateful, a daughter who had traded blood for duty. I sipped my coffee, bitter and hot, and paced the narrow kitchen. The army had taught me discipline, order, clarity. But family had never offered those things. With them, there was no clarity, only shifting shadows of blame and disappointment. Memories pressed in, uninvited. My mother's voice sharp with disapproval. Isabella always thought she was better than us. Nathan's muttered words heavy with bitterness. You just left. They were wrong, of course. I never thought I was better. I only thought I could be more. More than the narrow roles laid out before me. More than the resentment passed from one generation to the next like an heirloom nobody wanted but everyone carried. The army gave me that chance. It gave me a place where my worth wasn't defined by gossip or grudges, but by merit, sacrifice, courage. Yet in taking it, I had left Nathan behind. At least that was his version of the story. He had been the one to stay, the one to carry the expectations I had shed like a second skin. To him, my medals were insults. My silence was betrayal. And yet, here was his letter. A bridge or a trap, I couldn't yet tell. I sat at the kitchen table, the envelope between my hands, and wondered why now. Why, after years of silence, was he calling me back? Had something changed? Or was this another stage in the endless war between us? A battle not of bullets, but of words, guilt, and shame. Tell me, what would you do if a letter like this landed in your hands? Would you go, risking the old wounds being ripped open again? Or would you stay away, safe in the silence, but forever haunted by what might have been said if you had answered? That night, I placed the letter on my nightstand. I couldn't bring myself to tuck it away in a drawer, nor could I bear to throw it out. It sat there like an unblinking eye, watching me as I tried to sleep. The cicadas outside shrilled into the humid darkness, their chorus rising and falling like restless waves. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying Nathan's words in my mind. Come home. The army had taught me to face fear head-on. We were trained to advance when retreat seemed easier, to hold ground even when our bodies begged us to collapse. But this wasn't Kandahar or Baghdad or the endless dust of desert training grounds. This was something more dangerous. This was family. And family, I knew, could cut deeper than any enemy fire. I didn't decide that night, but the letter waited. And sometimes it isn't the wars overseas that test you most. Sometimes it's the quiet summons that demand you come back and fight the battles you thought you'd already escaped. I didn't answer the letter that night, or the next. Instead, I lived with it like one might live with an unwelcome guest, aware of its presence at every moment, resenting it, yet unable to turn it away. Each morning, I'd find my eyes drifting to it on the nightstand, the words echoing in my head. Come home. Mom is waiting for your answer. 3 days later, I gave in. It wasn't because the sting of the past had dulled. If anything, it ached more sharply with each hour. But I realized something I had always known in the marrow of my bones. Silence had its power, yes, but sometimes silence also held you hostage. And I was tired of being hostage to my family's shadows. So I pulled out a small overnight bag. Not the heavy duffel I had lugged across continents, but something simple, ordinary. Civilian clothes went in first, jeans, a blouse, a pair of boots scuffed at the toe. Then I hesitated. My hand hovered over my closet, where the uniform hung, pressed, polished, waiting. Should I bring it? It wasn't vanity. It wasn't pride. It was identity. That uniform had carried me through every battle, every promotion, every loss. It wasn't just clothes. It was proof. Proof of sacrifice, of perseverance, of the truth that no accusation could erase. With a slow breath, I folded the green jacket and placed it carefully in the bag. If I was going to face Nathan, if I was going to sit again at my mother's table, I wanted to walk in as the woman I had become, not the girl they remembered. As I zipped the bag, I caught sight of myself in the mirror. My reflection startled me. My hair was pulled back in a neat bun streaked now with silver. My face, sharper, harder than when I'd left home, carried lines that told stories of both laughter and loss. The army had aged me, yes, but it had also shaped me into someone I barely recognized, a woman with resolve etched into her very skin. And yet, beneath the steel, there was a flicker of fear, because no matter what I had achieved to my family, I feared I would always be the girl who left. I loaded the bag into the trunk of my car. The air was heavy with late summer humidity, cicadas buzzing in the trees, the scent of honeysuckle clinging to the air. My fingers gripped the steering wheel as if holding on to something steadier than my own breath. The drive stretched long, lined with pine and oak trees that blurred into green tunnels. Each mile closer to Georgia felt like a step backward in time. The army had taught me to measure distance in terms of risk, yards to cover under fire, miles to march in the dark. But this was a different kind of distance, when you couldn't measure in footsteps or maps. This was the distance between who I had been and who I had become. As the road unspooled before me, memories surfaced unbidden. I remembered the day I told my mother I was enlisting. Her lips had thinned, her voice sharp as glass. The army. Isabella, you think you're too good for this town, don't you? You think you're better than us. I remembered Nathan's silence then. He hadn't argued. He hadn't pleaded. He had just turned away, his shoulders tight, and left me standing in the kitchen with my mother's disapproval thick in the air. Later, though, he muttered words I would never forget. Go ahead. Leave. Just don't bother coming back. And I hadn't. Not for holidays, not for birthdays, not for funerals. Every time I thought of returning, the echo of his words held me back. The army became my home instead. My brothers and sisters in uniform became my family. Together, we endured the sweltering heat of the desert, the deafening silence of outposts in the mountains, the hollow grief of folded flags delivered to trembling hands. Out there, far from Georgia, I learned the meaning of loyalty, sacrifice, and love. But home had been reduced to letters I never sent and calls I never made. Now, though, the past was unavoidable. The highway signs blurred past. Welcome to Georgia. My grip on the wheel tightened. Have you ever felt your stomach twist when you cross into the place you once called home? That uneasy blend of nostalgia and dread. That was me, driving down roads lined with memories, every bend bringing me closer to the house I had fled. I thought about turning back. Twice I slowed the car. Twice I nearly took the exit that would carry me in the opposite direction. But both times I pressed on, because deep inside I knew something. If I didn't face this now, it would haunt me forever, and soldiers don't run from what haunts them. As twilight fell, I stopped at a gas station near the county line. The air smelled of diesel and fried food, cicadas singing their relentless chorus. I filled the tank, bought a bottle of water, and leaned against the hood, staring up at the darkening sky. This wasn't the first time I had prepared myself for a mission, but it was the first time the battlefield was a dinner table, and somehow that felt more terrifying than anything I had faced overseas. Would they listen this time? Would they see me not as the girl who left, but as the woman I had become? Or would this be another trial, another ambush waiting beneath the guise of reunion? I twisted the cap from the water bottle and drank. Then, sliding back into the car, I whispered the words I had spoken before every mission. Steady. Breathe. Move forward. The last leg of the drive was through winding back roads, the trees casting long shadows across the pavement. Each turn felt like peeling back another layer of time, carrying me closer not just to the house, but to the girl I had once been. Finally, headlights swept across the familiar gravel driveway. The house stood there, weathered but unchanged, its white paint peeling in places, the porch sagging just slightly. The sight of it stole my breath. It was as if the years had folded in on themselves, delivering me back to the place where it all began. I cut the engine. The night was thick with crickets, the air heavy with the scent of magnolia. My heart pounded. This was it. The letter had brought me here, and now the rest of the story was waiting inside. I lifted my bag from the trunk, its weight somehow heavier than the gear I had once carried in war zones. With every step toward the porch, the creak of the boards beneath my boots, I felt the past pressing down harder. And then I reached the door. My hand hovered over the knob, the wood cool beneath my fingertips. I took a breath and stepped inside. The living room smelled of rosemary and wood smoke. Voices murmured from the dining room, and my brother's silhouette shifted in the doorway. He was waiting. And I realized with a sharp jolt that this wasn't a reunion. It was a confrontation waiting to happen. The door creaked the same way it had when I was a girl, its hinges groaning like an old man reluctant to stand. The smell hit me first, rosemary, roasted chicken, and something sharper beneath it, wood smoke maybe, or the faint edge of tension so thick you could taste it. I stepped inside and felt the air shift, as if even the walls remembered me. The living room looked smaller than I remembered, its furniture worn but familiar. Family photographs lined the mantel, though my eyes lingered on the spaces where my face should have been. Nathan's graduation photo was there, framed proudly. My mother stood beside him, her hand on his arm. But where was mine? The omission wasn't an accident. It was a verdict. Isabella. My mother's voice drifted from the dining room, softer than I expected but laced with years of restraint. When I entered, she was standing by the table, apron tied neatly at her waist, hands smoothing fabric that needed no smoothing. She looked older, of course. Time had thinned her hair, carved deeper lines around her mouth. But her eyes, those sharp, assessing eyes, were the same. Mom, I managed. My throat was dry, though the word was only 3 letters. She studied me, her gaze catching on my uniform before darting away. You came, she said, as though she hadn't quite believed I would. Nathan appeared from the kitchen, tall and broad, his sheriff's badge catching the glow of the overhead light. His mouth curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. Didn't think you'd actually show, he said. I forced a breath. Neither did I. We took our seats at the long oak table, the same one where we'd eaten every Sunday dinner of my childhood. Plates of food waited, steam curling into the tense air. For a moment, the only sound was the clink of silverware as my mother fussed with serving spoons. Then she sighed, the sound heavy with years of disappointment. 7 years, Isabella. Not a phone call, not a letter, not even when your father passed. Her words cut deeper than she realized. I gripped my fork, knuckles whitening, but said nothing. Silence had become my shield, and tonight I needed it more than ever. Nathan leaned back in his chair, arms folded across his chest. I told her you wouldn't come. Told her you'd gotten too important in that uniform to bother with family. The bitterness in his tone was sharp enough to slice through the rosemary-scented air. He wasn't just making conversation. He was laying groundwork. I could feel it. Have you ever sat down to a meal where the food was warm but every word felt cold? Where the table itself seemed less a place of comfort than a battlefield waiting for its first shot? That was me, sitting there, every sense alert, waiting for the blow I knew was coming. My mother passed me a dish of potatoes, her hand trembling just slightly. Eat, she said, though it sounded more like an order than an invitation. You must be tired of army rations. I spooned food onto my plate, though my stomach was knotted. Nathan watched me, his eyes narrowed, calculating. You know, he began, his voice deceptively casual, folks around here wonder about you. They hear stories. Colonel Ward, the war hero, the big shot. But then they ask questions. Questions I can't answer. I looked at him but said nothing. What exactly did you do out there? He pressed. All those medals, they don't come easy, unless maybe someone's exaggerating. The words hung in the air, heavy and deliberate. My mother's fork paused halfway to her mouth, her eyes darting between us. She didn't tell him to stop. She never had. I swallowed, the taste of food ash in my mouth. You think I lied? I said quietly. Nathan leaned forward, pulling a folder from the chair beside him. He dropped it onto the table with a thud that made the dishes rattle. I don't think, he said. I know. The folder sat there like a live grenade, daring anyone to open it. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze fixed on the papers as though they might explode. And I sat there, my hands steady in my lap, my pulse roaring in my ears, realizing that the ambush I had feared was no longer in the distance. It was here, at the table, in the hands of the brother who had once been my protector. Nathan's accusation wasn't just words. It was a blade sharpened by years of jealousy, resentment, and silence. And as he pushed that folder across the table toward me, I knew the dinner was no longer about food or family. It was about truth, or the version of truth Nathan was determined to force down my throat. That made my mother flinch. That's convenient, isn't it? Tuck it all away behind a wall of secrecy. I wonder why. Maybe because there's nothing real behind it, or because there's everything real behind it, I said. And classification doesn't bend for family drama. That stung him. I saw it in the flicker of his eyes, in the way his thumb dug into the edge of the paper until it bent. For a second, my brother looked like the boy who used to tie his sneakers in double knots and fall asleep with a flashlight on, just in case our father didn't come home from a double shift. Then the sheriff returned, hard and sure. He spread the pages wider, like a dealer laying down proof. If you're so confident, he said, go ahead, correct me. Tell me what's wrong with the DD 214. Tell me where the MOS codes go. Tell me which unit patch you think you wore. You want me to talk about my work at this table, I said. You want a confession or a lecture, I'm not sure which. I want the truth. The truth, I said quietly, doesn't always fit into what you can stomach. And it doesn't belong in front of the potatoes. Across from us, my mother's mouth tightened. Isabella, don't be cruel. I turned to her. I'm not. I'm protective. That's what soldiers do. I swallowed the rest of the sentence, the part that wanted to say, even when the danger is you. You watching this, have you ever been asked to prove your life to someone who already decided you're lying? Ever had facts ready, lined up like soldiers on a parade field, and realized they'd only be shot down because the verdict had been written long before the trial? If you know that choke in the throat, that useless ache, just know you're not alone here. If this resonates, stay. Drop a line in the comments. Sometimes the right words can stitch a stranger's courage back together. Nathan dragged another page forward. This award citation you supposedly received. It reads like a movie script. Vague. Overblown. No details. No names. You expect me to believe a commendation that doesn't mention a single unit designation or location. Meritorious citations omit details when they must, I said. So people don't die because a paragraph made someone feel included. And yet you included yourself, he shot back. Colonel Ward, heroine of everywhere and nowhere. Heat rose in my chest, not anger so much as grief with sharp corners. You think I want this? The guessing, the suspicion, the space between who I am and what I'm allowed to say. I don't, but I live with it because the work matters more than your comfort. My comfort? He leaned in, the badge on his chest catching the light. I stayed Isabella. I buried Dad with Mom. I paid the bills when the mortgage ballooned. I fixed the porch and changed the oil and sat through 1,000 Sundays where your empty chair said more than any postcard ever could. Don't talk to me about comfort. There it was, not a legal case. A wound, a long, unhealed slice running the length of his life. I felt the urge to reach across, to press my palm over his, to say, I know, I know, I know. But he wasn't ready for solace. He wanted a verdict. I'm sorry you carried it, I said. I am, but you can't turn that weight into an excuse to invent crimes. He snorted. Invent? He flicked the photograph with his finger. Look at the boards. Wrong. Look at the rack. Out of order. Look at this discharge. It's garbage. In my periphery, I watched steam dissipate, watched a ribbon of gravy glide into the linen and stain it a darker brown. Small domestic failures, the kind that happen when no one is really eating. I let my gaze fall to the papers, not to read them, just to note the tells. Wrong font for an army form. Anachronistic logo. A signature block for a command that merged years ago. Little betrayals that would fail at a glance if you'd ever stared down the real thing by fluorescent light after midnight in a S1 shop at Fort Hood or Bragg. You say you want the truth, I said. Fine. Truth, the font on this first page wasn't used on that form the year you claim. Truth, this citation would never leave a commander's desk with a comma spliced like that. Truth, awards sit in a specific order, and whoever mocked up that photo didn't bother to ask anyone who's worn them under a July sun. Truth, the Army doesn't call it a serial number. Hasn't for a long time. For a heartbeat, he looked almost relieved, like a man who finally gets the fight he's been itching for. There we go. Now we're speaking the same language. We aren't. I shook my head. You want me to pull my whole life from behind a vault door and set it on this table so you can stab at it with a fork. It shouldn't be behind a vault door, he said. If it's real. My mother broke in, voice thin but sharp. Enough. She looked at me, then at him, then back again, as if the two of us were eyes in a face that no longer belonged to her. We are not animals. We don't shout at the table. We wouldn't have to, Nathan said, softer now, more dangerous for the quiet if she'd just tell us what she actually did. I took a breath and found the place I go when I need it most, the cool interior room where training hushes the static. I served, I said. I followed lawful orders. I led soldiers. I did my job, and I can't tell you more than that. He smiled without humor. Can't or won't. Both, I said, and neither. I let my eyes meet his and stay there. You don't want the truth, Nathan. You want victory. He flinched as if I'd reached across and slapped him. For a second, the ruin of what we used to be flashed between us, bike rides at dusk, scavenger hunts in the attic, the night he broke his wrist and I carried him halfway home before Dad found us by the ditch, both of us crying and laughing like fools. Then it was gone. He shut the folder, squared its edges, and laid it in front of him with the reverence of a holy book. I spoke to people, he said. People you didn't expect me to find. People without clearance, I said, who told you what they shouldn't have said and less than what you needed to hear. You're dodging. I'm protecting. My voice went even, commander flat. A private investigator is not authorized to handle, duplicate, or disseminate federal records. A county sheriff doesn't adjudicate UCMJ offenses. If you think you've uncovered a federal crime, this should already be in the hands of the U.S. Attorney and CID. The fact that it isn't tells me everything. A muscle jumped in his cheek. He slipped a hand under the folder and slid something small onto the table, a pair of stainless cuffs. He didn't open them, he just let them sit there, gleaming under the light like a dare. My mother gasped. Nathan. He didn't look at her. If you're not going to talk, he told me, that's fine. You can do your talking at the station. On what charge? I asked softly. His throat moved, impersonating a federal officer. Fraud, theft of government property. We'll start there. Start where you don't have authority to finish, I said, and you know it. You don't get to tell me my job. You're right, I said. The law does. For a beat, no one spoke. The house creaked, old wood shifting, summer heat settling bones. Outside, a cricket started up and then went silent, as if even the night had decided to hold its breath. You still with me? This is the part in a story where people decide who they are, not with grand speeches, but with small choices, the placement of a hand, the opening of a clasp, the way someone meets someone else's eyes and does not look away. If you know that crossroads in your own life, if you've stood inside it with every nerve lit, let me know you're here. It's easier to walk these rooms when you aren't walking them alone. Nathan tapped the cuffs with his finger once, a tiny metallic tick. I'm done arguing. I never started, I said. He opened the folder again, flipped to the back, and produced a final page, triumphant. This is from the sheriff's office in a neighboring county, he said. We ran your name against their system. Nothing. Not one active duty record attached. Not one. I blinked. The sheriff's office doesn't hold Army personnel files. I didn't add that the Defense Manpower Data Center and DCSA do, or that even those returns wouldn't mean what he thought they did. He turned this into a scavenger hunt in the wrong library. He took a breath that sounded too much like a man bracing to give an order. Stand up, he said. Our mother surged half out of her chair, fingers white around her napkin. Nathan, please. I didn't move. I could have said a dozen things. I could have pushed back from the table, could have met him in the center of the room and let old pain collide with new anger. Instead, I stayed seated and made stillness my weapon. It's a thing they teach you when the job puts you in rooms where the loudest voice wins only for a minute. If you don't fuel a fire, it runs out of air. Call Sid, I said. If you believe what you're saying, call the Army Criminal Investigation Division. Ask for the duty agent. Tell them you're a county sheriff with questions about a suspected fraud touching federal property and personnel. See what they advise. If they want me, I'll go where they say. But I'm not walking into your station because a PI printed the wrong font on a form. He stared at me, color high in his cheeks. Then, wary, he glanced down at the papers again as if some paragraph might rearrange itself and save him from the next decision. You're making this harder than it has to be, he said. No, I told him. You are. For the first time that evening, he looked unsure. It lasted a second, one heartbeat where doubt flickered and rationality tried to crawl back in. Then the badge on his chest seemed to weigh him down again. Power is a funny thing. It can feel like armor or a trap, depending on how you wear it. He closed the folder. He picked up the cuffs. The click of the hinge sounded like a pistol empty-chambered in a quiet room. My mother's breath hitched, small and sharp. I won't run, I said. I'm not going anywhere. You're right about that, he said. I thought of the young MPs I'd mentored who learned early to ask, what's my authority? What's my jurisdiction? I thought of the briefings where we drilled the difference between federal, state, and military lanes until it became reflex, a muscle memory that kept good people from making bad mistakes. I thought of how many times I'd told soldiers, don't let your pride write checks the law won't cash. Last chance, I said softly, not a threat, not a plea. Make the call. He hesitated. Just long enough for the house to creak again and for me to picture, with cruel clarity, the night spiraling into something neither of us could rewind. Then he shook his head, jaw set. I'm done asking. My mother whispered my name like a prayer with no altar to land on. I met her eyes. It's okay, I said, and meant it more for myself than for her. Nathan rose. The chair legs scraped the floor with a sound like a stubborn door dragged open. He stepped behind me, close enough that I could feel the heat of him, the cologne he wore to church and funerals. The cuffs waited in his hand, bright as moonlight, heavy as history. If you're watching this with your shoulders tense, breathe with me. In for 4, hold out for 6. It's what we do in rooms like this, when the noise inside us tries to outrun the truth. He reached for my wrist. And somewhere, faint but certain, the phone in the hallway began to ring. The hallway phone rang, its jarring tone cutting through the suffocating quiet like a flare over a battlefield. But Nathan didn't move toward it. He stayed behind me, cuffs poised, the metal kissing cold against the soft skin of my wrist. He had already made his choice. I didn't flinch. I had seen cuffs before, in war zones and interrogation rooms, on allies and enemies, on strangers who had made poor decisions. But I had never seen them at my mother's dining table, next to chipped plates of mashed potatoes and gravy stains spreading like shadows across linen. This was a new kind of battlefield, one I had never trained for. The ringing stopped. Silence settled heavy again. I breathed evenly, keeping my shoulders loose, my eyes steady on the flickering candle in the center of the table. Nathan leaned close. His voice was low, meant only for me. "You've got two choices, Isabella. Come quietly or make me drag you out of here." My mother pressed a napkin to her lips, her hands trembling. "Nathan, please." But I didn't answer. Silence has its own weight. It isn't emptiness, it's presence, a refusal, a shield. Soldiers learn early that not every question deserves an answer, not every provocation demands fire. Sometimes the most powerful weapon you can wield is stillness. So I sat, my gaze fixed, my body composed. My silence told him, "You don't get to define me. Not here, not ever." Have you ever been in a moment where every instinct begged you to fight back, to scream your truth into the noise, and yet you chose silence instead? If you have, you know the strength it takes. You know how silence can roar louder than words, how it can strip power from the one trying hardest to provoke you. Nathan's hand tightened on the cuffs. "You think you're above this?" I stayed quiet. The candle sputtered, wax pooling against the silver holder. My mother's breath caught, and still I didn't move. Nathan snapped one cuff around my wrist. The click echoed sharp and final. For him, it was victory. For me, it was confirmation, proof of just how far he was willing to go to humiliate me, not in private, but here, in front of the only family we had left. The second cuff closed around the arm of my chair, tethering me in place. He could have fastened it to both wrists, could have bound me fully. But this was worse. It was symbolic, a spectacle. He wanted me immobilized, shamed, displayed like a criminal caught red-handed in her lies. I glanced at him then, finally. Not with anger, with something closer to pity. My eyes told him, "This isn't strength, Nathan. This is fear dressed as authority." He straightened, stepping back, breathing hard as though he'd just run a mile. The badge on his chest gleamed, but his eyes betrayed him. For all his bravado, there was uncertainty lurking in the corners. My mother's voice cracked. "Nathan, what are you doing?" "What I should have done years ago," he said. "She doesn't get to walk in here, drape herself in a uniform, and lie to our faces. Not anymore." His words stabbed, but I didn't bleed. Not outwardly. I stayed composed, hands folded in my lap, the cuff biting cold against my skin. Inside, though, memories surged, moments of real confinement, real danger. A checkpoint in Kandahar where a wrong glance could mean a bullet. A dark room overseas where I sat across from a man whose silence was as dangerous as his weapon. Those had been battles for survival. This was theater, and I would not give him the performance he wanted. Silence stretched long. My mother shifted uncomfortably, her fork scraping across porcelain, though she didn't eat. Nathan paced once, then twice, waiting for me to break, waiting for me to plead, to defend myself, to give him the satisfaction of words. I offered him none. Do you know what it feels like to starve someone of the reaction they're desperate for? To let their own noise echo back at them until it turns hollow in their ears. That was my choice that night, and it was the only choice that kept me whole. Nathan slammed his hand down on the folder. "Say something," he shouted. "Anything." But I didn't. Instead, I let the silence swell until it filled every corner of the room, until even my mother couldn't bear it. She reached across the table, her hand hovering just above mine, afraid to touch the cuff but aching to bridge the divide. "Isabella," she whispered, "why won't you defend yourself?" I turned to her, finally breaking the stillness with a soft voice. "Because the truth doesn't need shouting, Mom. It stands even when I don't." Her eyes glistened, torn between belief and doubt, between love and loyalty divided down the middle of her children. Nathan growled low in his throat, frustrated. You think silence will save you. It won't. But I knew better, because silence wasn't surrender. It was resistance. It was faith that the truth, my truth, didn't need me to prop it up. The phone in the hallway began to ring again. This time, Nathan froze. His eyes darted toward the sound, then back to me. The cuffs glinted between us, steel against wood. The ring grew louder, more insistent, until even he couldn't ignore it. Slowly, he stepped away, leaving me bound to the chair. My mother's breath shook as she rose to answer, her footsteps echoing on the hardwood. Nathan hovered near me, his voice a whisper meant only for my ears. You can sit there all night, Isabella, but eventually you'll break. I met his gaze, unblinking, not tonight. And in that moment, I realized something profound. Sometimes, strength isn't proven in the battles you win, but in the ones you refuse to fight. The hallway phone clicked as my mother picked up, her voice trembling with each word. Nathan still stood over me, cuffs locked, convinced he'd won. But what neither of them knew was that silence has allies, and mine were already on their way. The hallway phone went quiet. My mother's voice, faint through the walls, carried a tremor I hadn't heard since childhood. She was stammering, half apology, half hesitation. Nathan didn't seem to hear her words, only the silence between them. He returned to the table, pulled out his chair, and sat across from me, his eyes fixed on mine like a man determined to win a staring contest with history itself. The cuffs bit into my wrist, not cruelly but firmly, a reminder of the choice he had made. I could have shifted, rattled them, protested the indignity. But I stayed still, my hands resting lightly in my lap. The weight wasn't in the metal. The weight was in the eyes of my family, in the years of resentment piled like stones between us. Look at you, Nathan said finally, his voice low but vibrating with the charge of barely contained anger. Sitting there like you're above all of this, like you're untouchable. You think silence makes you strong. I said nothing. He leaned forward, elbows on the table. It makes you guilty. The accusation didn't sting the way he wanted it to. I let it float across the space between us and fall, unanswered, like a bullet that had missed its mark. Have you ever been accused of something you didn't do, and known, absolutely known, that no amount of defense would matter? That the person across from you wasn't interested in truth, only in the theater of your humiliation? If you felt that, you'll understand why I chose not to play his game. My mother returned, hovering near the doorway, clutching the phone like a lifeline she wasn't ready to surrender. Her eyes flickered from Nathan to me, torn between her children, paralyzed by a love that had always been conditional. Nathan, she whispered, please, this isn't right. He didn't look at her. It's justice, Mom. Somebody has to hold her accountable. Accountable for what? She asked, her voice breaking. His silence in that moment was telling. He couldn't answer her without admitting the truth. This wasn't about laws or charges. This was about control. I shifted slightly in my chair, the faint clink of steel punctuating the moment. Nathan's gaze sharpened as if he'd caught movement in an enemy's flank. You're not going to sit there smug forever, he said. I tilted my head, calm, steady. I could. The simplicity of it infuriated him. His face reddened, jaw tightening, and for the first time, I saw just how much power silence could hold. It was a mirror, forcing him to see himself without distraction. And he didn't like the reflection. He stood abruptly, pacing the room like a caged animal. You think you're clever. You think this little game of patience makes you the hero. He stopped, turned sharply. But heroes don't abandon their families. Heroes don't leave other people to pick up the pieces. Still, I said nothing. Because he wasn't speaking to me anymore. He was speaking to the empty chair at our father's funeral, the space I had left behind in every family photo since. He was speaking to the echo of his own loneliness, the burden of being the one who stayed. My silence left him alone with his own words, and that was more than he could bear. He slammed his fist against the table. Plates rattled, glasses quivered. My mother jumped. I stayed steady. "You will speak," he demanded. "You will answer for this." I met his eyes, finally, not with defiance, but with calm certainty. "No." One word, quiet, firm, the kind of word that holds ground without needing an army behind it. Nathan froze, his breath ragged. He had expected me to fold, to argue, to break. But he hadn't expected the power of restraint. My mother pressed a hand to her chest, tears glistening at the corners of her eyes. "Please," she whispered again, though I wasn't sure anymore who she was pleading with. The air grew heavier, the kind of thick stillness that comes just before a storm breaks. Outside, wind stirred the branches, and somewhere in the distance, thunder murmured. Nathan paced again, his boots echoing on the wooden floor. "You've always done this," he spat. "Silent treatment. Cold shoulder. Acting like you're better than the rest of us." "Well, not this time. Not when I've got the evidence. Not when I've got you in cuffs at your own mother's table." I lowered my eyes, not in shame, but in acknowledgement of his pain. Then I whispered softly, almost to myself, "The truth doesn't need me, Nathan. It stands on its own." The words landed differently than my silence. They weren't defense. They weren't argument. They were reminder. A seed dropped into soil he didn't want tilled. And that was when it happened. A knock at the door. 3 sharp raps, steady and commanding, not a neighbor, not a casual visitor. The kind of knock that carries authority, the kind that demands attention. My mother startled, the phone slipping from her fingers and landing with a dull thud on the carpet. Nathan stiffened, his hand tightening instinctively on the cuff still dangling from my chair. His eyes darted toward the door, then back to me. I remained still, silent, calm, because I already knew the silence had spoken, and now the truth was here. That knock was more than sound. It was the shift of the entire night, the turning of the tide. And as Nathan hesitated, caught between pride and fear, I realized the real confrontation was only just beginning. The knock came again, firm and deliberate, 3 strikes that made the window panes tremble. Nathan's hand stilled on the cuffs, his breath caught halfway in his chest. My mother froze in the doorway, one hand clutching the wall as if it might hold her up. And me, I stayed seated, wrists bound to the chair, calm as a stone at the bottom of a river. Because I already knew silence always has its allies, and they had arrived. Nathan hesitated. I could see the war flickering across his face, curiosity battling fear, authority colliding with guilt. He had spent years believing that small-town power made him untouchable. But that knock, it carried a different weight. Authority on another level. Authority that wasn't his. Finally, with stiff steps, he strode to the door and yanked it open. 2 figures filled the porch light. The first was a man in a dark suit, his tie knotted with federal precision, his ID case already in hand. The second was a uniformed officer, army dress blues pressed sharp, insignia gleaming even in the dim light. Behind them, a third figure lingered, junior, younger, posture rigid as a steel rod. The man in the suit spoke first. Sheriff Ward. His voice was calm but edged, the kind of voice you don't argue with. Nathan straightened, trying to sound in control. "That's me." The man held out his badge. "Special Counsel Whitaker, U.S. Attorney's Office. This is Major Harris, Army Sid. We need to speak with you." For a heartbeat, no one breathed. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. Nathan blinked, thrown off balance, his shoulders squaring as if to remind himself of the badge on his chest. "About what?" he asked, though his tone wavered. Whitaker stepped forward. "We have evidence that you, acting in your capacity as county sheriff, retained a private investigator to unlawfully access classified military records belonging to Colonel Isabella Ward. That's a federal violation under Title 18, Section 793. We'll discuss the consequences in detail, but you should understand, Sheriff, this isn't just questionable conduct. It's a crime." The words fell like thunder into the dining room. For the first time that evening, Nathan looked small, his authority shrinking under the weight of something larger than him. I remained silent. Major Harris entered next, his boots sounding precise on the wood. His eyes landed on me, cuffed to the chair. For the first time in hours, someone looked at me with recognition, not suspicion. He gave the barest nod, the kind soldiers exchange when words aren't safe but brotherhood is understood. Nathan's voice broke the moment. "You can't just barge in here." Whitaker cut him off. "We have a warrant, Sheriff, signed and sealed. Sit down." My mother, pale and trembling, sank into her chair as if her legs had given out. Nathan stood frozen in the doorway, jaw clenched, the cuff still dangling from his hand. For years he had wielded control in this house, in this town. But tonight the balance had shifted. Have you ever watched arrogance drain from someone's face in real time? Watched as certainty turned to doubt, as the armor of pride cracked under the hammer of truth? That's what I saw in my brother's eyes. And I'll be honest, part of me wanted to savor it. But a deeper part of me mourned it too, because pride breaking is still pride dying, and it's always painful to watch. Whitaker's voice was steady, professional. "Sheriff, we're prepared to discuss charges of unlawful possession of classified material, misuse of office, and potential conspiracy. You may remain here tonight pending interview, or you can come with us. But you will relinquish any further documents in your possession immediately." Nathan sputtered, his hands shaking. I was protecting my family. I was exposing a fraud. Major Harris's eyes hardened. "The only fraud here is your PI's methods. Colonel Ward's record is clear. Her service is honorable. The Bronze Star awarded to her speaks for itself." The room spun in slow motion. My mother gasped, one hand gripping the tablecloth, her knuckles white. Nathan staggered back a step, his face crumbling, and me? I sat bound, cuffed, steady, silent, because I knew the moment was building, and when it arrived, I wanted it to land without interruption. Whitaker gestured to Harris. "Major, if you would." The officer turned to me. With sharp efficiency, he reached down and released the cuff from my wrist. The click was clean, final, a sound like a verdict delivered. He pocketed the cuffs and looked squarely at Nathan. "This woman outranks you, Sheriff, and she outranks me. She's a colonel in the United States Army. Don't forget that." Silence settled again, but this time it was Nathan who bore the weight of it. His power had collapsed, and he stood unarmed in a battlefield he had created. The junior soldier behind Harris stepped forward then. He was young, maybe 22, 23, his uniform too new, his salute practiced but sincere. He came to attention, boots clicking, and raised his hand in a crisp, reverent gesture. "Colonel Ward," he said, voice strong, "ma'am." The salute cut the room in two. On one side, the boy who honored me. On the other, my brother who had shackled me. And between us, the truth, shining undeniable. That salute wasn't just protocol, it was revelation. It was the soundless declaration that all the lies on Nathan's table could never erase the truth of who I was. And as my family watched, jaws slack, the tide turned completely. But the night wasn't done, not yet. The young soldier held his salute, chin lifted, eyes steady, not defiant, not showy, just exact. Indoors, salutes aren't usually rendered unless you're reporting. He was. Specialist Rivera, reporting as ordered, ma'am. The respect in his voice was a clean blade cutting through the stale air of that room. I rose, squared my shoulders, and returned the salute with measured precision. It wasn't theater. It was recognition of rank, of service, of a truth that didn't need to be argued at a dinner table to exist. Whitaker, Assistant U.S., attorney, not some distant bureaucrat, let the moment land before he spoke again. Sheriff Ward, per the warrant and accompanying affidavits, federal agents will take custody of any materials you obtained from or about Colonel Ward's military service. That includes copies, printouts, photographs, and digital files derived from your investigator's work. His tone stayed even, almost gentle, the way a steady hand keeps a hot pan from spilling. You have the right to counsel. You are not under arrest at this moment, but you are a subject in an ongoing federal investigation. Do you understand? Nathan's mouth opened, then shut. I could see the fight in him wobble, then rally. Pride doesn't go quietly. I asked questions, he said hoarsely. I did my job. Major Harris stepped to the edge of the table, posture formal without menace. Asking questions isn't the problem, Sheriff. Directing an unlicensed investigator to misrepresent himself, access a secured property, and remove or duplicate federal records without authorization, that's the problem. Chain of custody matters. Jurisdiction matters. The Uniform Code of Military Justice and Title 18 aren't optional reads. He turned to me, not as if I were a prop in Nathan's drama, but as if I were exactly what I was, an officer in the United States Army. Ma'am, are you hurt? No, Major. My voice came out calm, not because I wasn't shaken, but because calm was the only way to keep this from unraveling. I'm all right. Have you ever had a moment when your name is returned to you whole, when the version of you someone else wrote gets torn up in front of your eyes, and the real version stands there without apology? If you have, you know the ache that comes with the relief. If this is hitting close to home, breathe with me. You're allowed to feel the ground come back under your feet. Whitaker gestured toward the folder Nathan had spread like a trap across the linen. This binder stays with us, he said, sliding it into a large evidence envelope. He nodded to my mother, whose fingers had tightened around the back of her chair as if bracing against a wave. Ma'am, I'm sorry to bring this into your home. We'll be as brief and respectful as possible. She gave a single, jerky nod. Her eyes found me. For the first time all evening, they weren't sharp or distant. They were searching. A tremor ran through her mouth as if an old script had been yanked from her hands and she no longer knew her lines. Nathan was still standing, fists clenching and unclenching. You're telling me all those papers are fake, he demanded. The photos, the citations. Some are counterfeit, some are altered, Harris said. Most of them are context stripped to the point of nonsense. Whoever compiled them didn't know what they were looking at or didn't care. Nathan's laugh cracked. That's convenient. It's verifiable, Harris answered. Form numbers, revision dates, insignia placement, award order of precedence, down to basic personnel terms. The Army hasn't used serial numbers for a long time, Sheriff. He let that small correction rest where all the bigger ones would soon follow. Whitaker straightened. Let me be clear. This is not about embarrassing you. We're here because lines were crossed. The proper response, if you truly suspected fraud, would have been to notify Army CID or the Department of Defense Inspector General, not to stage a confrontation at a family dinner and circulate questionable evidence without chain of custody. He paused, voice softening a fraction. We're not unsympathetic to complicated families, but the law doesn't bend to personal history. My mother drew a breath that sounded like a door finally opening. Colonel, she said, the title catching in her throat. Are they saying? I met her eyes and gave a small nod. Weariness pressed at the corners of my bones, not the kind that comes from distance, marched, or time awake, but the kind you get when you've carried silence longer than any ruck. Yes, Mom, I said. They're saying the truth. Harris shifted, the movement slight, respectful. He took a slim folder from his leather case and placed it on the table, beside the cooling roast and the graceful little gravy boat my grandmother used to fuss over. He didn't open it fully. OPSEC isn't suspended because a family wants closure, but he revealed enough for the room to hear it, and for Nathan to have nowhere left to hide. Colonel Ward's active duty status is verified, he said. Prior assignments include intelligence billets with Army and Joint Commands. Her Bronze Star is awarded for meritorious service during combat operations. He did not name locations. He did not name units. He did not need to. Further specifics are classified and remain so. Specialist Rivera, still at the edge of the room, didn't look at the paper. He kept his eyes on me, as a junior enlisted does when an officer's privacy is not theirs to touch. The steadiness in his stance felt like a plank laid across a rushing stream. Somewhere in another life, I might have been his commander. In this life, for this moment, I was simply someone he could anchor to with a custom as old as our service. Nathan's shoulders finally sagged. The defiance didn't vanish. It rarely does, but it faltered, as if the scaffolding underneath had given way. "You don't understand," he said to no one and everyone. She left. She left all of this. I could have told him that leaving and serving aren't the opposites he thinks they are. I could have told him that duty expands the circle of us until it includes people you will never meet but would give your life for just the same. I could have told him that leaving home to serve is sometimes the only way to come back a person you can live with. Instead, I said nothing. Some truths travel better in silence. Whitaker turned to Nathan again, voice formal. "Sheriff, we are seizing the folder and any derivative reproductions. You are not to disseminate, discuss, or post details related to the documents you collected. Do not contact the private investigator. Do not destroy or alter any related materials. You will receive a written notice. If you'd like to consult counsel, now is the time." He nodded at the pistol on Nathan's hip. "For everyone's comfort, please secure your service weapon." Nathan hesitated. Then, with a stiffness that had nothing to do with duty, he unholstered and set it gently on the table. Major Harris cleared the chamber with the practiced choreography of 1,000 armories, locked the slide back for my mother to see it was safe, and sealed it in an evidence pouch for temporary safekeeping. The procedural care, no gloating, no dramatics, spoke louder than any rebuke. "Ma'am," Harris said to my mother, "we apologize for the disruption. We'll complete our advisements and be on our way." Before he could continue, Specialist Rivera shifted again, glanced at Harris for permission, received the barest nod, and stepped close enough to speak without amplifying the spectacle. "Request permission to present honors, sir." It was an old-fashioned ask, a small ceremony where none was required. The major's eyes cut to mine. I gave the slightest incline of my head. Harris nodded back to Rivera. "Granted." The specialist faced me squarely, boots together, shoulders set. He brought his right hand up in the clean arc of a reporting salute. Indoors, yes, because he was reporting, because respect sometimes needs to be seen by the eyes that doubt you most. I returned it, the motion smooth from a lifetime of muscle memory. Around us, the room stopped breathing. Even the candle flames steadied, as if air itself had decided to stand at attention. Do you know what it feels like when a single gesture untangles years of misunderstanding? When the vocabulary of your life, the one spoken in chow halls and convoy briefs and pre-dawn PT, translates itself right in front of the people who always insisted they couldn't hear it. If you've ever longed for that moment, hold this one with me. And if you believe stories like this help someone else stand a little straighter, stick around, share it forward. Your voice might be the bridge someone needs. Whitaker broke the quiet with the lightest touch. "Colonel Ward, you are, of course, free to pursue complaints for unlawful detention or defamation." He nodded toward the empty cuff on the chair. "We'll document the restraint and the circumstances." I looked at the chair, then at my brother, then at the hands of my mother curled around the edge of the tablecloth like she was holding on to the last inches of the world she understood. "No, counselor," I said. "Not tonight." Nathan flinched, confusion crossing his face. He had braced for retaliation. Mercy often strikes harder because it leaves a person alone with what they chose. Harris closed his folder. We'll coordinate further interviews through your office, he said to Whitaker, then to Nathan, and with the appropriate state authorities where necessary. Sheriff, for now you remain in place and available. Don't leave the county without notification. He didn't say suspension, that would be for local procedures. He didn't overreach. He didn't need to. He turned to me one last time. Ma'am, if you'd prefer an escort to your lodging. I'm fine, I said. Thank you, Major. He inclined his head, an older gesture than the service itself, and stepped back. Rivera gave me a quiet ma'am, low enough not to bruise the moment, and followed his senior out. Whitaker secured the envelope under his arm, offered a final card to Nathan. Your counsel can reach me here, and moved to the door. Before he crossed the threshold, he faced the room as a whole. For everyone's sake, please don't speculate about this outside this house tonight. Let the process work. He didn't threaten. He advised, the kind of authority that doesn't have to raise its voice. The door clicked shut on a draft of cooler air, and the house sagged into the kind of silence that follows a passing storm, the world still there but altered. Somewhere down the block, a dog barked twice, then thought better of it. The candle guttered and gave up. My mother sat down slowly. For a long time, no one spoke. The cuffs had left a faint bracelet of red around my wrist. I rubbed at it, then let my hands fall to my sides. The imprint would fade. Some marks do, others don't. The ones we can't see, the ones laid down by words spoken too often and truths withheld too long, take their own time to heal if they heal at all. Nathan stared at the empty spot where his folder had been as if he could will it back through force of need. When he finally looked up, his face was raw. I thought I was protecting us, he said. I thought if I could prove it, if I could show, I don't even know anymore. A desperate laugh scraped out of him. I just wanted you to be something I understood. I stood very still. It was all I had left to give him. Sometimes the hardest truth, I said gently, is that you don't get to define the people you love. He blinked hard, swallowed, and looked at our mother. Mom, she didn't answer right away. Her eyes were on me, and for the first time in 7 years, there wasn't blame in them. There was grief, yes, for the years we had burned. There was age. But there was also a small, tired pride, like a woman who has watched a storm line roll over a field and found her house still standing. Isabella, she said, my name careful in her mouth, as if she were learning it new. I didn't know. I could have said you didn't want to. I could have said I tried and you wouldn't hear me. But those would have been victories of the moment, not the kind that matter. I know, I said instead. It's all right. Is it, though? The question echoed somewhere I didn't want to go. If you're still with me and you've had your own tables where truth finally pulled up a chair, you know that relief isn't the same as repair. Still, relief is a beginning. It's the first clean breath after being held under. I righted a wine glass that had tipped in the chaos, set it carefully beside the plate. Small order, where so much had tilted out of place. Nathan watched my hands as if the movement might decode me more easily than any form or citation. Are you staying? He asked, and I heard the child in the question, the boy with the double-knotted shoes. Not tonight, I said, but I'll come by tomorrow if you want to talk like family, not like plaintiff and defendant. I didn't say if you're ready to listen. He heard it anyway. He nodded, and the nod had none of the snap from the badge on his chest. It was vulnerable, ridiculous, human. Okay. Outside, the night rearranged itself. An engine idled briefly somewhere, then faded. I pictured Harris and Rivera and Whitaker not as saviors, but as people returning to their own long, unglamorous processes, paperwork and follow-ups, and the quiet machine that keeps accountability from becoming revenge. Real authority isn't a spotlight. It's a system that keeps rooms like this from turning into battlegrounds. I collected my jacket, the same one that had glared like a provocation when I walked in. It lay across the back of my chair like a calm animal. As I slid my arms into the sleeves, I felt again the familiar weight of it along my spine. the remembered heft of responsibility and service, and the thousands of names I would never know who nonetheless lived in the quiet behind every decision. The bronze star wasn't pinned to my chest tonight. It didn't need to be. The people who matter know what isn't worn. At the threshold, I paused. My mother had stood without me noticing, hands crossed, face soft in a way I barely recognized. "Will you call?" she asked. The question was tentative, a hand extended across a ravine. "Yes," I said, "I will." On the porch, the air felt newly rinsed. Somewhere a wind chime answered an easy breeze. Gravel shifted under my boots with the small honesty of unsettled ground. I stood for a moment and let the night steady me. Have you ever walked out of a room that should have broken you and realized it didn't? Have you felt the strange, tender power of choosing dignity over spectacle, restraint over rage? If you have, you know the way your bones feel quieter afterward, as if each one has been put back in its right place. If you're still here, if this story is giving you something to hold, hit the follow, share it with someone who needs a little steadiness tonight. Sometimes the stories we pass along are the only bridges people find. I got into my car and sat with my hands on the wheel, listening to the crickets insist on their small music. In the rear view, the house seemed both smaller and more real than it had when I arrived. It would be there tomorrow, and the day after, and we would start the slow work of being a family that didn't require someone to be destroyed for someone else to feel whole. I started the engine. Headlights stitched a path down the drive, over the ruts Nathan had never quite filled. At the road, I stopped and looked both ways, the way they teach you long before you learn what vigilance truly costs. Left, clear. Right, clear. Forward, mine. I eased onto the asphalt and let the darkness open ahead of me. Behind me, a table stood empty of accusation and heavy with everything else. Before me, a long road, a job still to do, soldiers counting on me to show up in the morning the same way I always had, steady, brief, precise. I wasn't triumphant. I wasn't vindictive. I was exactly what I had trained myself to be for a lifetime. Quiet, certain, free. I don't remember the drive back to my motel that night. The headlights carved out a ribbon of asphalt, and beyond that, the world dissolved into a blur of trees and shadows. But my mind stayed back at that table, at the moment the cuffs were unlocked, and the truth stood without me needing to say a word. By the next morning, word had spread. Small towns are like that. You can whisper behind a closed door and still find your voice echoing down Main Street by sunrise. By the time I ordered coffee at the diner across from the courthouse, the waitress looked at me differently. Not with suspicion, not with curiosity, with something closer to respect. The kind she gave the veterans who gathered every Thursday morning, silver hair bent over eggs and black coffee, telling stories they'd already told 100 times. News came quickly after. Nathan had been placed on administrative leave, badge and weapons surrendered until the federal review was complete. For a man like him, whose identity was braided so tightly with his uniform, the loss was more than professional. It was personal. I didn't celebrate. I didn't gloat. I'd worn a uniform too long to mistake another's downfall for my victory. Consequences are not trophies. They are lessons. Have you ever wanted so badly to say "I told you so," but stopped yourself? Have you swallowed words that burned to come out because you knew speaking them would only deepen wounds that were already raw? If you have, then you understand what I carried in those days. Silence wasn't just what saved me at that dinner table. Silence was what kept me from becoming the very thing my brother had accused me of being: cruel, self-serving, vindictive. I didn't visit the house right away. I let the storm clear, let my mother sit with what she had heard. In those days, I learned something soldiers know instinctively. After the battle, don't rush the silence. Let the smoke lift, let the ground cool, let people find their footing again. A week later, I drove back. The porch light was on even though it was afternoon. My mother opened the door before I knocked. She looked smaller, shoulders curved inward like someone who had been carrying too much for too long and finally set some of it down. "I made coffee," she said. Just that. No accusation, no sharpness. We sat at the same table, stripped now of roast chicken and grievances. Just two mugs, the smell of coffee rising between us. "I didn't understand," she whispered after a long pause. "I thought you left us. I thought you chose the army instead of family." Her voice trembled. "I didn't realize you were choosing us in a different way." Her words cracked something in me I hadn't realized was still brittle. All those years of trying to translate what service meant, all the silence that filled the gap when translation failed, it came down to this moment, this fragile admission. "I never stopped being your daughter," I said quietly. But I couldn't be only that. I had to be more. And I had to do it away from here. Tears ran down her cheeks. She didn't wipe them away. Nathan wasn't there. His absence filled the house, heavier than his presence had been. The papers said he was consulting with lawyers, waiting on hearings. I imagined him pacing rooms the way he had paced our dining room, fists clenching and unclenching, struggling with the reality that authority is not the same as truth. Part of me ached for him. He had carried his resentment like armor, but now the armor was cracked, and all that was left was the boy who once held my hand walking to school, swearing he'd always protect me. I could have hated him. Some people told me I should. But hatred is a chain too, and I'd already worn enough of those. So I chose release. Release looks different than forgiveness. Forgiveness sometimes implies that what was done can be undone. Release says, "I won't let what you did keep me bound anymore." The next time I saw him, weeks later, it was outside the courthouse. He didn't look like a sheriff. He looked like a man stripped down to his ordinary self. His eyes met mine for only a second. There was no apology, no explanation. Just silence. And I gave him silence back, not the heavy silence of accusation, but the softer silence of release. Because I didn't need to win. I just needed to walk away free. Have you ever had a moment when walking away felt like the loudest statement you could make? When putting down the need to be vindicated gave you more peace than any speech could? If you've lived that, you know what I carried as I turned and left that courthouse, boots steady on the cracked steps. Years have passed since then. I stayed in uniform. I kept serving, through deployments and assignments that asked everything of me. My record remains, with its medals and citations, but those aren't what I keep closest. What I keep are the quieter victories, soldiers who came home because I did my job, families who stayed whole because a mission succeeded, moments of humanity in places designed to strip it away. And sometimes when I'm alone, I think of that dinner table, not with bitterness, with gratitude, because that night taught me something no field manual ever could. Truth doesn't shout. It doesn't beg. It doesn't argue itself raw. Truth waits. And when the time comes, it stands on its own. I can still feel the cold bite of the cuffs on my wrist. I can still hear the echo of that salute in my ears. And I can still see the look in Nathan's eyes when the scaffolding of his certainty fell apart. But I don't relive those moments with pain anymore. I hold them as proof that silence is not weakness, that dignity is not surrender, and that freedom is sometimes as simple as choosing not to fight battles that don't deserve your voice. If you've walked through your own storm of misunderstanding, if you've been accused, doubted, silenced in ways that burned, I hope you hear this. You don't have to shout to prove yourself. You don't have to break yourself to make others whole. You are allowed to walk away, to release, to be free. So here's the truth I carry, and maybe you need to hear it too. Family isn't always safe. Silence can be a weapon. Truth doesn't need to scream. And freedom, real freedom, lives in refusing to let someone else define you. And as always, if this story resonates with you, if it steadied you in some small way, let me invite you, like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share it with someone who might need to hear that they are not alone. Because sometimes, The right story at the right time is its own kind of release. Years have passed since that night at the dinner table. Seasons have turned, deployments have come and gone, and the uniform has aged with me. Its fabric softened by time, but still carrying the weight of what it means to serve. I'm still here, still in the army, still answering a call that was never about medals or titles, but about showing up, day after day, for the people who depend on you even if they never know your name. Sometimes I wonder if that night changed me as much as it changed my family. The truth is, I didn't walk away from that table vindicated. I walked away lighter. The cuffs came off my wrist, but more than that, the grip of their misunderstanding loosened from my shoulders. I no longer needed their approval to know who I was. Family has come to understand more, bit by bit. My mother will call sometimes and ask about my day, careful not to pry into what I can't share, but wanting to bridge what once felt like an unpassable divide. Nathan, too, has softened. His eyes carry the cost of choices he can't undo, but I no longer see only resentment there. Sometimes, in the silence between us, I catch a glimpse of the boy who once swore he'd protect me, before pride tangled itself into that promise. And yet, I don't return seeking recognition. I don't linger in the hope of hearing the words I once ached for, "We're proud of you," because life has taught me something different. Some acknowledgments arrive too late, and chasing them can keep you bound to a chair longer than any set of cuffs. Have you ever carried that same hunger for someone else's approval, only to realize you don't need it to keep moving forward? Have you ever felt the shift when you stop waiting for applause and simply stand in your own truth? If you have, then you know what freedom feels like. I've learned that family is not always the safe harbor we're promised. Sometimes it's the storm you must navigate, the place where your deepest wounds are cut. But even then, it doesn't define you. The safe harbor can exist inside yourself, built from resilience, from dignity, from the quiet choice to keep walking even when others turn their backs. I've learned that silence is not emptiness. It's power. The night Nathan cuffed me to that chair, I said almost nothing. But in that stillness, I said everything. Words might have fanned the flames, but silence let the truth speak for itself. Sometimes silence is how we preserve ourselves when noise threatens to consume us. And I've learned that truth has a strange patience. It doesn't demand to be believed. It waits. It endures. And when the time is right, it reveals itself, unshakable, undeniable. You don't have to scream it from rooftops or fight every doubter. Sometimes the most radical act of faith is letting truth stand without your defense. Above all, I've learned that freedom isn't about revenge. It isn't about making someone pay. True release comes from refusing to let others keep their grip on the story of who you are. I don't need Nathan's downfall to feel whole. I don't need my mother's confession to feel seen. What I needed, I already carried inside, the knowledge of who I am, and the refusal to let anyone redefine it. Maybe you've lived through your own table like mine, accused, doubted, silenced. Maybe you've longed for a salute of your own, some sign that the truth you've carried quietly all along is finally visible to others. If so, hear me now, you are not alone. You are not invisible. You don't have to justify yourself endlessly to people who have already decided not to hear. Your worth doesn't evaporate in their disbelief. The table where Nathan tried to shame me no longer holds power in my memory. What remains is the moment of release, the clink of the cuffs opening, the simple act of standing up and walking away free. That is the sound I carry forward, the sound I want you to remember too. So if you take anything from my story, let it be this: family is not always safe. Silence can be your strongest weapon. Truth does not need to shout. It proves itself over time. And freedom is not found in retaliation, but in stepping away from those who would hold the pen to your life. And now, if you felt something stir in you while listening, if you saw yourself in the cracks of my story, I want to invite you to be part of this journey. Like this video if it resonated with you. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the stories we share each week. Stories of resilience, of human dignity, of the quiet courage it takes to live with integrity. Share this with someone who may need the reminder that they are stronger than the voices that try to define them. Because in the end, stories like this are not just mine. They're ours. They're bridges between the battles we fight in silence and the truths we long to see shine in the light. And together, by listening, by sharing, by carrying these truths forward, we remind each other none of us is alone. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful freedom of all.